Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Today we are talking about showing your impact with Google Analytics 4. A little bit of housekeeping here. Post your questions into the chat. That includes you folks that are on live stream. We will make sure to address them at some point before the end of the webinar. Possibly live, possibly at the end during our Q&A, but post them while they're fresh in your head because we don't want you forgetting that valuable question. A copy of these slides will be sent along with a link to the recording at some point after the webinar has completed. Give us a few moments to get that recording straightened out and ready to send. Okay. So a little bit about me. I'm a former software developer turned marketer, been the founder and CEO of Brilliant Metrics for about 10 years now. And in addition to doing things like this and leading the team at Brilliant Metrics, I also teach some courses at UW-Milwaukee School of Continuing Ed. And I am married with 3 young children who keep me definitely humble and confused. A little bit about Brilliant Metrics. We are a B2B digital first marketing agency. That means we don't mind traditional tactics, but we like to start with the digital stuff where it's easier to measure. And I think what sets us apart from a lot of other agencies is that our clients really lean on us to help them achieve their fullest potential and continuously improve as marketers, as a team, in both knowledge, skills, as well as in overall impact. All right, obligatory commercial out of the way. Let's move on to the meat of today's topic. So today I want to go through a few key basically configuration things that need to be done to set up Google Analytics 4 to really be able to get the value out of it that you need to be able to demonstrate your value to your stakeholders. To do that, we're going to go through events, conversion events, dimensions, metrics, reporting, and then we'll touch briefly on dashboarding. Why is this important? Well, there's a new data model with Google Analytics 4, and this new data model gives us some new opportunities to be able to really accurately convey the value that we are providing our organizations in marketing. In Universal Analytics, we were limited. In Google Analytics 4, a lot of those limitations have been pulled away, and we have these new opportunities. We can better customize the reports that we get coming out, as well as the data that's going in. And we can now use the same data model across apps and multiple different web environments to combine our data. And it'll stitch together the activity of an individual user across those different platforms. Ultimately, we just have more data to work with. One of the key changes here is how events are captured. In Universal Analytics, an event had basically 4 attributes to it. We had a category, we had an action, we had a label, and we had a value. And those were the 4 inputs that we could add to an event. And anything beyond that, we had to try and shove into one of those 4. It really limited our ability to get rich data back out because we couldn't get the data we wanted in. In GA4, an event just has parameters to it. So those parameters can be what are called dimensions, which are basically buckets that we can put this data in to get when we pull it back out, or ways to segment the data, or they can be metrics, which are values, either things that we're counting or things that we're measuring about that event. These are not unlimited, but for the sake of our arguments, they're pretty close to unlimited and give us the opportunity to add a ton more information into our Google Analytics installation than we were in the past. So how do we get that data in? The key driver to getting that data in is going to be your Google Tag Manager implementation. So if you aren't running Google Tag Manager, I would say the first thing to look at is getting Google Tag Manager installed and feeding all of your Google Analytics activity through Google Tag Manager first. The way you do that is you set up a trigger inside of Google Tag Manager that fires for the event that you want it to fire, and then captures the information you want to pass as parameters. That fires a tag. The tag then sends the information over to Google Analytics as a specific event. Once you do this, your event will just magically start appearing inside of Google Analytics. There's no configuration required on the analytics side. All the configuration occurs in Tag Manager. Now, in some rare instances, you can't tell Tag Manager how to identify that event. It just kind of happens and Tag Manager can't seem to catch on to it. Or Tag Manager can catch on to the event, but it's missing some of the important context or information about that event because it can't go and scrape that information from the page. In those instances, you can wire up what's called the data layer. And the data layer gives you an opportunity to pull information from the code of the website or the code of the app or the code of the platform and push that information into Tag Manager. Then Tag Manager can push that information over into Google Analytics. So if this is something you need to do, then you're going to have to work with your web developer to get that information from the website into Tag Manager and then from Tag Manager into Google Analytics. But once it's available in Tag Manager, then it's at the point that then a marketer can go and move it around with just a little bit of training in how Tag Manager works. So your action item at the end of this webinar is to make sure that you have a list of every single event that is important to you in measuring success or getting diagnostic indicators or KPIs, whatever it might be, so that you are able to know when users are taking the actions that are important to you on your web and other digital properties. Because again, GA4 lets you also pull app data in as well. And you're going to want to make sure that you've got your landing page generator included in here, or if you have a marketing automation platform that produces landing pages, make sure those are in here. If you have an e-commerce store, make sure that's also pushing data. Your portal, everything that you might have that your audience can be interacting with, making sure that all of that data is getting aggregated and pushed into the same Google Analytics 4 property, and that all the events are cataloged correctly as they come in. Once we have event data flowing in, now we can start to figure out what are our conversions. In Google Analytics, conversions in Google Analytics 4 are pretty similar to Universal Analytics, but they're a little bit different. First of all, the way they come out in reporting is different, and we'll get into that in a second. But second of all, each conversion gets counted every single time. You don't have converted sessions and not converted sessions. Here, you just have conversion events that just happen. And the way that you set them up is they aren't some sort of special thing that you set up inside of analytics. They are literally certain events get flagged as this is a conversion event. So when should you flag those events as conversions? Well, we found from a best practices standpoint that you want to put a pretty high bar behind these events being conversions. In Universal Analytics, we used to be pretty loose and about what we considered to be a conversion. But because the way that conversions come back out in GA4, they all kind of get lumped together, and it's harder to pull them apart and get to the conversions that really matter versus the ones that don't. And for that reason, you should really only mark the things that really matter as conversions. So we've set two bars for that. One, is this action on the critical path to either revenue or operational success? And we have to say revenue or operational success because the revenue ones are obvious. Did they add something or did they check out? Did they buy something from our store? Did they request a quote for something? Did they fill out a contact us form, right? Whatever they might have done there, those are the really obvious ones because those lead directly to revenue. But you also have other things that are considered conversions that aren't necessarily revenue. An example of this is if somebody applies for a job. So job applications are clearly a conversion. They're contributing towards that operational success, but they aren't necessarily revenue. So those count as well. The other bar is, would you consider this action to be an undeniable win for any media or promotion of your website that you have out there? So you post something on organic social, you send an email, you put an ad out there. If somebody takes this action off of that ad, that email, that social post, is this considered a win? And if it isn't an undeniable win, then don't mark it as a conversion. If there's instances where somebody would do this and it's not necessarily a good thing, don't mark it as a conversion. You want to set your bar pretty high on conversions. If there's other things that are positive signals you want to measure, we'll talk about how to measure those in a second with custom metrics. Keep your conversions clean, keep them only the most important things. You'll see these come out through various reports inside of Google Analytics. The other place that conversions come into play is if you have Google Analytics integrated directly with your Google Ads installation. In that instance, you can say to Google Analytics or to Google Ads, I think, to go and pull your conversion data from Google Analytics. This is kind of a time saver, and it makes sure you're measuring the same things on both sides as to what's important. But again, in this instance, you want to make sure that you're only sending positive signals or really strong signals to Google Ads and only marking those things that are really important as conversions. When you go to get the data inside of Google Analytics, you'll see you have a conversions column and a conversion rate column. These are metrics you can pull into your explorations, and they're present in a number of the reports. The thing that's different here is it's one metric, and then you can go and toggle and filter for which conversion you want to look at, but you can't look at more than one at a time, and it's really hard to go and piece out the individual conversions. So keep that in mind when you're deciding what needs to be a conversion. So your action item, after you have this laundry list of events, you're going to go through and mark those events that need to be conversions, and then work to get those set up inside of Google Analytics as conversions. Be selective. Only mark the ones that are really on that path to revenue or operational success. Those events you would consider undeniable wins if you generated traffic to your website and they took these actions. Okay, so earlier we talked about event data and the fact that we could push additional parameters for that event data. Those parameters fall into generally two buckets. They're either dimensions or metrics. Dimensions are ways you can group activity or users on your inside of Google Analytics to get better signal. Coming back to the point of this webinar, showing your impact, sometimes it is really important to bucket the metrics coming back out based on certain criteria, either at a user level or at a source of traffic level, usually. Custom dimensions are what lets you do that. And custom dimensions will sit in one of four scopes, is what they're called. The first is event scope. This allows you to bucket the events that you're tracking inside of Google Analytics based on the context of that individual event. What page were they on? What about that page is important? One of the common custom dimensions we'll set up at the event level is the page format. What is the page type, the template that's being used? The next level is the user level. Here you can bucket the traffic on your website about attributes of your users. And what's really cool about Google Analytics 4 is you can pass in a user ID along with your when your tags fire, and then Google will recognize that user when it comes back, either through a different platform or through your app or through other venues, if you can map a unique ID between those different venues. This is really useful for bucketing your traffic on your website for things like, is this an existing customer or is this a new customer? What market segment is this person in? What persona is this person? Attributes of a user that don't change much over time, you're going to want to set as user scoped custom dimensions. We'll talk about how to get that data in a moment. The other two areas, and I want to put a caveat here, that aren't quite ready yet in GA4, but are on the roadmap, are session level scoped custom dimensions. This allows you to bucket your traffic based on where it came from. And the item level custom dimensions. This really only applies if you have a catalog on your site or an e-commerce store. In this instance, you can extend out the data that's available in Google Analytics on those individual items to include different attributes like manufacturer or source or different categories of these products that are important to you. Now, important caveat again, session and item are not currently available. They should be introduced sometime in the coming months. We don't have a time frame from Google on this, but they have promised that they're coming. In the meantime, we have been tagging a lot of the session level stuff at the event level, so we can at least pull some reporting based on this, and then we're overloading some other dimensions to make that happen. Catch me offline if you want to learn more about how we're doing that. Okay, how does this apply to demonstrating your impact? Well, if you're like most marketers, especially B2B marketers, your objective changes depending on where your audience sits in your product delivery. So if this is an end user, your objectives are a little bit different about how they interact with your website versus if they are a wholesaler or a distributor or a retailer or somebody along those lines. Or if you have independent reps, their traffic and their engagement on the website is going to be very different from other points in the sales channel. So separating that out can be really helpful in demonstrating your impact. The same can be true for different market segments or maybe different regions. You're going to want to make sure that you have different dimensions set up to meet your needs for slicing and dicing the data out based on how your objectives might change in the marketing activities that you're doing. So your action item is to figure out how you want to be able to slice and dice that data coming back out of Google Analytics and set up the custom dimensions to get the data in bucketed that way. Next up is custom metrics. Conversion data in GA4, as I said before, is a bit limited in being able to understand how, which needles you're moving, I guess would be the best way to put it, in your marketing efforts. If you really want to understand that, the best way to do it is to create custom metrics. Because if you just try to work with conversions, when you go to get that data out, a conversion is a conversion, and the different types of conversions will usually get lumped together. Splitting them out in reporting is somewhat possible. Inside of explorations, it's really a pain. And so getting that data out on an individual or a subset of conversions is tricky. The other thing is you can't produce a report with more than one type of conversion in a column. There's just no way to do it inside of GA4. And so we'll often want to look at different types of conversions next to each other in Universal Analytics. There's no way to do that. And so the way around that is to create a custom metric for each one of your conversions. So your custom metric, there's really two types. The first one is what I was just talking about, replacing your conversion counts with a metric count. It's a frequency count. We're counting the number of times something happens. So I create a custom metric for the number of scrolls beyond 50%. And then when I fire the event for scroll beyond 50%, I just tell Google Analytics, add 1. I say, this is my metric. My metric value is 1. And then it will add 1 every time somebody scrolls beyond 50%. I can do the same thing for form submissions or number of times somebody uses a product or product configurator, or better yet, the number of products they've configured. I can do this for event registrations or various interactions on the web page. Videos viewed to 75% if I want to set a threshold for success on that. Any of these things I want to count, I can set up a custom metric to count them. And then I can get a column in any report by adding that custom metric to the report for the number of times that thing happened. Custom metrics aren't limited to just counting, though. We can also add things up. So if there is another sort of scalar kind of metric that's important to your business, you can add that here. Examples, and some of these are a bit construed, but minutes of video watched. If video consumption is really important to you, say you're a training organization, you want to capture the number of minutes of training somebody has actually engaged with, you can create a custom metric to do that. Scroll depth would be another example, but here, instead of measuring the number of times somebody scrolls to 50%, literally measure the number of pixels they scroll and add that up over time. There is a revenue metric that's built in and should be used for measuring how much money people have spent on your e-commerce website, but maybe you want to measure the dollars added to cart as a preliminary metric in order to watch that. That would be another custom metric you could set up. Or focus time, the number of times somebody has that tab open and they're focused on it. These are all examples of different types of metrics that you can add. All right. One of the metrics that we like to add here at Brilliant Metrics for our clients is something we call a soft conversion. A soft conversion is not a revenue generating conversion. This is another action that is valuable, but isn't something that is necessarily going to lead directly to revenue or critical for operational success. The soft conversions we tag are listed on the right-hand side. They're things like scroll depth greater than 50%, or if somebody downloads a PDF, somebody filling out a form or a newsletter subscribe, where, that's not directly leading to revenue, but that form gets us a new subscriber. It gets us identifying somebody in our marketing automation system. It's a good thing that happened, something we want to track, but not necessarily a conversion. So we'll set up a soft conversions metric, and anytime somebody takes one of these actions, we just pass a 1 to increment that number over inside of Google Analytics 4. And this allows us to kind of unify some of our paid media efforts on cost per soft conversion. It allows us to pull this data out in meaningful ways inside of GA4 to go and see which traffic sources or pages are leading to the deepest engagement. To get this data in, again, Tag Manager is your friend to push these custom metrics in. Sometimes these metrics aren't necessarily available on the page for Tag Manager to grab. So again, you may have to ask a developer to go and wire up the data layer to go and get the data into Google Analytics. But otherwise, for the ones you're just counting, all you have to do is pass an extra parameter that is your metric that you want to measure, and then just add 1 every single time. And now you're going to get those counts inside of your Google Analytics 4 for all of those important events that you want to count, but you don't want to set up as conversions. So your action item, figure out what you need to count. Those are your frequency metrics, or measure. Those are your cumulative metrics. And make sure that you have not only conversions for the ones that are contributing towards revenue or operational success, but also that you've got your custom metrics set up to count them individually and track those individually as individual columns inside your reporting. It'll really help you in trying to get that meaningful data out of GA4. All right, let's touch on reporting here. When it comes to reporting, Universal Analytics had custom reports, but they were super limited. GA4 is completely customizable. Almost every report in GA4, you could blow away, you could tweak, you could change, you can make it your own. And so there are 3 things that you're going to want to make sure to do after you've taken the previous steps. You're going to want to take those custom metrics and dimensions that we talked about and get them loaded into your reports, because by default, all of your existing reports inside of GA4 don't give you access to those dimensions or those metrics, because the Google engineers don't know they exist. They're custom dimensions, they're custom metrics. So you have to add them in so that users can interact with those metrics or see those metrics. Users can interact with those dimensions and aggregate your data and bucket it by those new custom dimensions that you've added. It can be really useful to create domain-specific reports. So for example, if you have somebody on your team that's responsible for organic social, you're going to want to create reports that filter out the traffic that isn't organic social so they can see how their traffic is performing. That might be duplicates of all the existing reports with those filters automatically applied. Another example might be if you have people responsible for certain regions, right? So we have our APAC group, we have our North America group, we have our Latin America group. Those folks only want to see the data pertinent to their regions. Great. Build them custom reports that filter out the data by default to their regions. It can be really useful for being able to get that data easily accessible by the marketers that need it in order to be able to understand, get that feedback on the efforts that they're putting in. So your action item off of this is to go and jump into what's called the library section of GA4 and create those custom reports, create custom categories, create custom reports that are specific to your users and your users' needs, so they get that feedback and also help you demonstrate your impact in that particular area. Don't forget to also modify all of the stock reports to include the rich dimensions and metrics that you added earlier. So now you can see that data and report out on that data. So far, we've done a good job of getting the data in and getting the data out through reports, but I'll be honest, the user interface in Google Analytics 4 is a little harder to use than it was in Universal Analytics. They've added a ton of power, but with that power comes some complexity. And your average non-marketer isn't necessarily going to be able to jump into Google Analytics to get the data they need. You can help them by creating custom reports, but that only goes so far. The really good way to get them access to the data that they need is through dashboarding. Now, I think Google did a little bit of a bait and switch on us here, because their intent was to set up an end-to-end stream of tools and platforms to get the data in and get the data out in gorgeous dashboards for executives, as well as rich interactive reporting inside of GA4 for marketers. But they went and broke their own beautiful chain here. So let's talk through that. They intended for your website and your app to be hooked up to Google Tag Manager, from Google Tag Manager to push data into Google Analytics. And then their intent was that, well, your marketing users, your power users, we're going to go through the Google Analytics interface, and we're going to give them the section of GA4 called Explorations that is just amazingly powerful for being able to slice and dice data and do rich deep dives into the data in Google Analytics. But it takes a little bit of training and a lot of practice to get used to using. So their intent was, well, we'll give Looker Studio as a way to visualize the data from Google Analytics and make a stock connector from Looker Studio over to Google Analytics to go and pull that data out into visualizations for our non-GA4 users, for our non-marketing users. But then they went and broke that, because they put API limits inside of Google Analytics so that Looker Studio can't pull the data fast enough from GA4 or often enough to make it useful. There's a workaround, but it's not super accessible to every brand. One of the really cool things about Google Analytics 4 compared to Universal Analytics is you can, for free, without any extra work, push your data from Google Analytics 4 straight into Google BigQuery as well. Google BigQuery is a database sitting in the cloud, in Google's cloud, that lets you put massive data sets out there and analyze them through either developers writing tools and queries and stuff like that, or to visualize that data through a tool like Looker Studio. Now, it's not super easy to get this set up, but I think it's worthwhile for most brands to at least get it set up to be pushing the data into BigQuery. The cost of storing the data there is minimal, and you're going to get a lot of additional benefit being able to go read it there. A little word to the wise on this, though. If you're working with an agency or a third party to set this up, make sure that either you own that Google BigQuery instance, or you have an agreement with them on how you're going to get the data out of their Google BigQuery instance should you part ways. Because the last thing you want to have happen is to have some third party own the database that all that data is going into. Then you guys break up, and then you don't have access to any of that historical data. But I think it's worthwhile to work with somebody to get this set up. This will allow you to create your dashboarding in Looker Studio without having any of the API limitations of Google Analytics. So your action item, identify your dashboarding needs. Do you have stakeholders who are not going to be trained in Google Analytics 4, aren't going to take the time to learn it or dig in which case it might make sense, instead of creating them custom reports, to create them dashboards. If that's true, then figure out how to start pushing that data into BigQuery now. You don't have to worry about building the dashboards now, but start getting that data into BigQuery so that you can build those dashboards in the future. Because building them straight off of Google Analytics, while Google says that's perfectly possible, and it is, it's just none of your reporting works for very long or very well. And with that, I'd like to open the floor to some questions here. I know we've got at least one come in from that came in from LinkedIn. Let me pull up the chat here. I don't see any on the Zoom meeting. All right. Harish asks, the Google tag must be added to the website for these reports. That is correct. Well, no, it's not correct. I should say the Google Tag Manager has to be added to the website for these reports. So I want to come back here and talk a little bit about this setup right here. It is possible to go directly from your website or your app straight to Google Analytics. But technically, you're going to want to take a little jump there. For websites, that jump is through Google Tag Manager. For apps, that jump is through the Firebase SDK. Either way, you're going to want to make sure that you have some tool here. And again, for most of us, it's mostly web that we're working with, that will take care of easily identifying and managing those segments. All right. Emily asked when the recording of this presentation will be available. We usually get that out in about 2 business days or less. So look for an email. And then Madeline asks, we've noticed that there are no segments in Looker Studio. Do you know if it will be added? Is there a workaround you'd recommend? No, there are no segments inside of Looker Studio, and I don't know that there would be a workaround, or I don't know that there would be I don't know if that will be added or if that's planned, because segments are something that are configured inside of Google Analytics 4 to essentially slice and dice that data on the way out. It's not something that happens to the data on the way in. So instead of relying on segments to go and pull your data into the right buckets, this is where custom dimensions will be your friend, because custom dimensions organize that data on the way in, not just on the way out. So I would recommend that you take a look at how you're using segments inside of GA4 and see if you can set up custom dimensions to organize that data on the way in. Those will be available inside of Looker Studio, regardless of whether you're coming through BigQuery or going directly from GA4 into Looker Studio. Any other questions? Okay, I want to thank everybody for taking the time today to come learn with us. If you haven't already, follow us on LinkedIn to be notified of future events. And oh, do you have wait, we got one more last minute question from Emily here. Do you have any more examples of events that could be tracked? Absolutely. There are a lot of things that can happen on your website that are not necessarily being tracked automatically. So anytime you have an interactive element, you're going to want to track that. You're going to want to track when somebody signs in or signs out. You're going to want to track when somebody clicks a share button on your website would be an example of one. Form fills, definitely. And there is an automatic tracking for form fills that is built into GA, but I'd recommend turning that off and building your own tracking for form fills. The reason being, most of your forms are probably coming from either some forms plugin inside of WordPress, or better yet, they're coming from your marketing automation platform, and you want to push some of that rich information about which form they're filling out into Google Analytics. In order to do that, you have to turn off the automated form fill tracking and create your own. Other examples would be if somebody is interacting with a product on your website, product configurators would be another area. So how are they looking at that product? Anything that they can click on a page that doesn't take them to another page, you're going to want to make sure that there's an event for. So think about it that way and kind of comb through your website. Okay. No more questions, I don't think. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. And I hope you got some value from today. Follow us on LinkedIn to make sure that you're hearing about more of these. And I look forward to seeing you next month at our next webinar, the topic of which I can't remember right now. So all the more reason to follow us. Have a wonderful day.